listener production.
Hello, happy Friday and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. The Suncorp Super Netball Grand Final is happening tomorrow. The Adelaide Thunderbirds will face off against the Melbourne Vixens at the Adelaide Entertainment Centre, with the Thunderbirds hoping to win back-to-back titles. Now, this season has been the most attended in the history of Australian women's sport, with a record-breaking 331,841 fans, marking a 25% increase from last year. So that got us thinking, why hasn't netball had a Matildas moment?
I think over the years we've definitely had moments where netball has been the pinnacle sport for women, you know, women wanting to watch and families wanting to come to the games. But I think we're all blown away by what happened last year with the Matildas. It was just unbelievable to see it all play out.
Helen Smith's conversation with former Diamonds player Bianca Chatfield coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, we've got Katrina Blowers here with the headlines. It is Friday, the 2nd of August.
Hello, everyone. We are beginning with good news, which is how I love to begin the headlines. And the Aussies have had another successful night at the Olympics. Jemima Montag taking out bronze in the 20-kilometre walk on a very hot day in the French capital. While in the sailing, it isn't official yet, but due to a qualifying quirk, Aussie sailor Gray Morris has been guaranteed a medal just by taking to the water. But he'll have to wait 24 hours to actually get it. Officially, Australia is sitting fourth on the medal tally with 7 gold, 6 silver and 4 bronze. That's a total of 17.
Yeah, the Australian team has also produced some excellent results in the team sports overnight, Katrina. We saw the Kookaburras beat New Zealand 5-0 in the hockey, and the women's basketballers rebounded from that opening loss to Nigeria to down Canada overnight. And the men's water polo team has had another win. They beat home side France 9-8. And despite being the lowest ranked team, the Aussie women had wins over China and the USA in the 3x3 basketball.
Yeah, and in some behind-the-scenes pretty major news, Tony Gustavsson has parted ways with the Matildas after the side crashed out in the group stages. Now, this might have come as a surprise to some people. It certainly surprised me, but his contract was apparently up and the decision was mutual, we're being told.
There's also been some scandal in the boxing, Katrina. There's this gender debate that has erupted over Algerian boxer Iman Khelif. Now, she was a boxer who failed a sex test at last year's World Championships, but she was allowed to compete in the women's Olympic welterweight preliminaries, which happened overnight. Now, her Italian opponent quit minutes into their bout, saying she was being hit too hard. She said that she had a suspected broken nose, and her coach came out to say that Khelif, the Italian's opponent, was a man. Now, Khelif has never said she is trans. That has never been anything that has been discussed around this athlete. The IOC has been forced to come in and put out a statement on this because it's sparked quite a nasty war of words. Some really awful things are being said and ideas being thrown about. Now, the IOC has essentially said that the boxers that are there at Paris right now have passed the long-held entry requirements for the Olympics, and that it was previous decisions in other leagues that saw them thrown out of those games. So basically saying that the rules are different for the Olympics, but also calling for unity from all of the boxing federations around the world to come together and to agree on what they need to qualify athletes. So essentially saying it should be uniform. There seemed to be a bit of a thinly veiled threat as well from the IOC, saying that if this doesn't happen, boxing may not be included in the LA Games in 2028. So this is one that is going to, I think, this conversation around athletes and you know, sex requirements for games is going to continue. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that as that unfolds. We'll see what the response is.
Yeah, and Sasha, I think there is a point there that as long as there is inconsistency in the rules in a particular sport, let alone across all sports, that does, create a grey area, and that's where you have fertile ground for that kind of toxic abuse, which is absolutely unacceptable no matter what your views are. Russia has surprised the West by releasing 16 people in a prisoner swap overnight. The prisoners included the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and 2 other American citizens. Now, this deal comes after months of negotiations behind the scenes, and it saw people from 7 different countries released from prison in what is an extraordinary exchange for 8 Russians who were released from prisons in the West.
Now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free.
That is the US President Joe Biden announcing the deal. He was surrounded by relatives of those people at the White House overnight. This is the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union that the Kremlin has agreed to such a deal. The swap occurred at an airport in Turkey overnight. Apparently it all happened so swiftly and under such a cloak of secrecy that the lawyers for some of these international prisoners didn't even know, and turned up to court dates that these people were supposed to attend, and they weren't there, and they were really panicking and worrying where they were, but they were actually part of this deal.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's giving similarities to Julian Assange when all of a sudden it happens so quickly, but they don't want to talk about it in the lead up in case things fall through, because they can fall through at a moment's notice by, from one side saying, actually, no, we don't want to do that anymore. And look, it is a major diplomatic win for Joe Biden, who of course is still the US president. We've been talking about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but Joe Biden continues to sit in the Oval Office in the White House, and he has vowed to continue working, as the president for the next 6 months until the new leader takes the office in January next year. And look, speaking of, work continuing, we have seen a bill introduced to Congress overnight. It's called the No Kings Act. I'll give you a guess what that's about. That is reversing last month's Supreme Court decision that effectively gave immunity to presidents, in this case specifically Donald Trump, for certain criminal acts as long as he was in office at the time. So this applied to Trump, but also would apply to future presidents. Whether it gets through is another thing. As always, there's people on either side who are going to debate it and decide whether it gets through. But it is another sign that Biden is continuing to work while he's in office. Staying with US politics, and Donald Trump is continuing to come under fire for comments he made questioning Kamala Harris's identity. So this story exploded yesterday. As a refresher, here's a little of what Trump had to say.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
Yeah, he made those comments at a gathering of black journalists, an interesting place to make those comments. Harris, meantime, has responded.
It was the same old show, the divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better.
Unsurprisingly, Katrina, Trump's comments have triggered condemnation from both sides of the political divide. Some Republicans have urged the candidates to stop the trash talk, while one Alaskan senator for the Republicans criticised the former president for defaulting to issues that, quote, aren't issues.
Yeah, and far from retreating from these comments, Trump has doubled down on them overnight. In fact, he's even published a picture of Harris in a traditional Indian sari. This is a picture published years ago, so he's dredged that one back up again, saying, "Thank you, Kamala, for the nice picture you sent from many years ago. Your warmth, friendship and love of your Indian heritage are very much appreciated." We should point out Harris's mother is Indian and her father is Jamaican. This all has echoes of what happened years ago when Trump questioned Barack Obama's heritage, and Barack Obama eventually had to produce a birth certificate proving that he was actually born in Hawaii like he said he was. Trump said that, this strategy worked for him. I think he was interviewed on ABC News and he said, "I didn't think I went overboard. Actually, I think this made me very popular, and I do think that I know what I'm doing." And I think, muddying the waters like that, a lot of people aren't avid news watchers, so then they'll hear Trump's comments on something, it'll create questions in their mind, and they won't then go on to do the research to find out if what he said is actually true. So, it's a strategy that's worked for him in the past with the birther controversy with Barack Obama, and that's probably why he's doing it again. And a bit of space news to finish up today's headlines. It turns out Mercury could be covered in diamonds that are 18 kilometres deep. A team of researchers have analysed the surface of the solar system's smallest planet and worked to recreate the conditions in which Mercury might have come to be. And they found that the combination of things like carbon, the right temperature and high pressure combine to create diamonds. And if they are on the planet, they could be sitting under the surface and running as deep as 18 kilometres, which is a beautiful picture in my mind. There's never actually been a sample taken from the planet though, so we don't know this for sure. But maybe this news will create a new space race to mine Mercury for the gems, Sasha. You never know.
Well, one of the researchers apparently doesn't think so. He says it would be impossible, even with future more advanced technologies, to mine mercury for these alleged diamonds because apparently if they are there, they're at a depth of about 500 kilometres. But he did say, though, that, you know, lavas can melt and what they do is bring up things that are deep in the surface, so they could rise the diamonds to the top potentially. But the idea of drilling down a couple of metres and finding this sea of diamonds. What a sight, though. Can you imagine? 18 kilometres thick diamonds. I mean, you'd picture Elon Musk getting ready and flying something up there to start mining it straight away. If it was true, you'd think so, right?
Maybe it could become like a flex. You know how, there's a push now, obviously, to not have blood diamonds, and for good reason. You could say, darling, this diamond's from Mercury.
Good call. Hey, we'll see who ends up sporting them. Like I said, keep an eye on Elon Musk. I wouldn't be surprised if he's keeping an eye on Mercury now. Katrina, thank you so much for being here for the headlines. Next up, it's our deep dive, and we're asking the question, why hasn't netball had a Matildas moment?
Hi, Helen Smith here for the briefing. Everyone remembers last year's Women's World Cup soccer tournament, most notably the interest in the Australian team, the Matildas. It was Tilly's time, with the Australian team packing out stadiums and generating an incredible groundswell of support for women's sport. But to be fair, the women's cricket team have also been gaining a lot of support over the last few years, and interest in women's AFL and NRL has also grown considerably. Now, tomorrow is the Suncorp Super Netball Grand Final, and while at the grassroots level netball is super popular, it's never really exploded like the Matildas. But maybe that's about to change. This season has been the most attended in history of Australian women's sport, with a record-breaking 331,841 fans, marking a 25% increase from last year. Maybe netball is having its moment. And Bianca Chatfield is a former Australian representative, having played for the Diamonds 59 times between 2001 and 2014. She's also won 6 premierships, 4 with the Melbourne Phoenix and 2 with the Melbourne Vixens. So we know who Bianca will be cheering on when the Vixens face off against the Adelaide Thunderbirds in tomorrow's grand final. Bianca, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing. You played at the top level for 19 years, winning a Commonwealth Games gold medal and a World Cup gold medal. You must have seen an incredible change in the sport since you began playing A-grade netball back in 1998.
Whew, 1998. My gosh, that doesn't even feel right. It seems like that long ago. But yes, I had a massive career as a player, and I actually see it as quite fortunate in that, I made the Diamonds for the first time in 2001, and seeing the progress the sport has made, from being really amateur at the very start, and then I've been through so many different iterations of what netball has looked like in the professional kind of times. And it's changed dramatically in a lot of ways, and in other ways it's still so similar in terms of what it's like being in the teams and how the teams, operate in their professionalism. Like, the resources around the playing groups have definitely changed, and that's been great, but also the attitudes of the players hasn't. And that's what I've really loved seeing in our sport, is that the women that play are professionals in what they do and how they are as athletes, but also what they do off the court. And I think that's super important as well.
So you just mentioned there some of the resources changing, probably the structures of support of netball. Why hasn't netball had its Matilda moment, considering it does have such huge grassroots numbers?
Do you know what? It's kind of debatable in a way, because I think over the years we've definitely had moments where netball has been the pinnacle sport for women, women wanting to watch and families wanting to come to the games. But I think we're all blown away by what happened last year with the Matildas. It was just unbelievable to see it all play out. And it wasn't just people attending the games. It was about, the audience, and the broadcast numbers were huge. So I'd like to think that, that's still probably to come for a lot of sports, that real one moment you can put your finger on that really changed the game. And I think for netball, like coming up, the World Cup that's going to be in Sydney in 2027, I think that's something that we definitely have to pinpoint as a place where Australians can come, and we need to find bigger stadiums really to be able to hold the games, to allow more people to actually come and watch the games too, because we're getting sellout crowds across Super Netball and for our internationals. So at the moment, the biggest stadiums hold around that 12,000, and Kudos Bank Arena in Sydney holds 20,000. But I mean, imagine if you could put a netball court in the middle of the MCG or something in the future. Like, I know we might as well think big, because, you can never really understand how big a sport can get really if you put boundaries on it. So I love thinking big and thinking differently. And Liz Ellis is the new chair of Netball Australia, and I think that's a huge win for the sport, having someone of her expertise on and off the court to really help drive it. So yeah, he's hoping that there's something like that in the not too distant future for the netball. But I think what happened with the Matildas has only really helped and enabled every female sport out there to really continue to grow and push the boundaries.
Yeah, gosh, I would love to see a netball court in the middle of the MCG. And going back to some of those numbers, we've seen growth in NRL and AFL. Do you think that the Matilda fever has impacted these numbers across women's sport of sellout crowds and supporting them?
I don't know if it's got anything to do with the Matildas. What I actually think is that everyone and families and entertainment value, people go to sport more and more now for that, rather than other entertainments that you used to, whether families would go and pay to go to the zoo or something like that. They now choose sport as an option to go as a family. And we saw that a lot. You can even compare it to something like the families that all went and saw Taylor Swift, and that incredible positive effect that being around, whether it was at the MCG, whether it was in Sydney, going to see her in concert and to see what she could actually, the audience that she brings. And I think a lot of female sports bring that same audience, in that it is very family friendly. There's a lot of joy, a lot of positivity, and families can enjoy it all together. It's whether it's dads, mums, it caters for everybody. And so I think that's where we're really now seeing sport take that next level across all the different leagues, in being able to be really suited for entertainment for families to come and enjoy. And especially for games like netball, is that it's not a huge commitment in terms of time. You go, the game goes for about an hour and a half all up. There's stuff to do before the game on the concourse of the arenas, and you can still get in, be able to interact with the players as well after a game. The players do a good job in staying behind and making sure they chat to the fans when they can. So that's what I love to see anyway, and I think it's going to continue to grow the more we cater the games for families.
The Olympics are on right now. Why hasn't netball been an Olympic sport?
Oh, I'm loving watching the Olympics. I probably look so tired because I stay up as long as I can to watch as many events as I can. Look, I think simply why we're not an Olympic sport is because the main countries that play the game and that are good at the game are countries that are in the Commonwealth, and that's why it's been specifically a Commonwealth Games sport. I think if we had the big countries, like the US, like China, playing the game and loving the game, then I think that's when it would really have a big, strong push to be an Olympic sport. I mean, I'd love it to see it in, Brisbane in 2032. That would be amazing, but the likelihood of that happening and for it to continue on as an Olympic sport, I think, is very limited with the countries that currently play the game. So I'd love it to be there. I would have loved to have been able to, have a crack at playing at the Olympics, but the reality for our sport is it's not, I don't think, where it really is kind of situated right now.
We all watched and supported netball players last year in their fight against Netball Australia to get the fairer pay deal. Now, the players won that after going on strike, forcing Netball Australia's hand. Given the boost in audience this year, Do you think it's time to go back to the negotiating table?
Well, it doesn't really work like that in terms of going back to the table so quickly, because obviously you sign the collective bargaining agreement, over a few years. But the push last year and the big thing last year was the whole revenue share model, making sure that as the sport grows, the players would still get a piece of the pie. And that's what they pushed so hard for. That's why the fight was really tough to watch from everybody, around who loves the sport. But they pushed for that, and they've got a version of that in their collective bargaining agreement now. So the bigger the game gets, the more the players get. And so it actually at the moment is working in the favour of the sport and the players and all the stakeholders around the game to continue to grow the game. So I'm sure the negotiating will happen again in a few years' time, and let's hope that everything is in a much more positive position than what it was last year when they were at the table.
Yeah, for sure. But it does sound like it was a great step forward for all the players in the tournament. Now, let's go to tomorrow's big game. What is your tip?
Look, obviously the Thunderbirds go in as absolute favourites. They thumped the Vixens by 25 in that semi and then by 15 in the round. So for me, they go in as favourites, but as a former Vixens captain, I really find it hard to tip with my head. I want to tip with my heart, and I hope the underdog gets up. So I'm going to tip the Vixens by 2 with my fingers crossed.
If I'm tuning into KO to watch, what's one matchup that I should keep my eye on?
Oh, look, the Adelaide Thunderbirds, they have, I think, the all-time best defender that we've ever seen in the game, and her name's Shamira Sterling-Humphrey, and she'll be up against Diamonds goal shooter Sophie Garvin. So that matchup, the Vixens shooter against the Adelaide Thunderbirds goalkeeper, is one to keep your eye on, because I think it's going to be very pivotal in how the game ends up playing out. But, you won't be disappointed. There's pretty stellar matchups all across the court for tomorrow's game.
That was Bianca Chatfield, a former Australian representative and 6-time premiership winning player. And reminder, the grand final is on tomorrow night on KO. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast or on TikTok and YouTube. Just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.